So, the other day, I had the privilege of participating in an 11-hour string of interviews on a campus, and as I got ready to go to these interviews, many people made it very clear that I had to wear a suit when I went. And you can see I'm not naturally a suit person, though I do like to dress up occasionally. It kind of made me bristle to think that I wouldn't be respected unless I did wear a suit. And as I pondered why this was, I realized it's probably because I read Thoreau when I was a kid. So today, I thought I would take you back to my roots in my childhood and show you what I was reading back then that made me the way I am now, particularly with regards to Thoreau's thoughts on clothes and fashion. So this is Walden, and I'm actually going to be quoting mainly from like the very beginning. In the first chapter, he talks a lot about clothes and fashion, and it's just a kind of a string of wonderful quotes that I'm just going to kind of throw at you, and you can digest them and enjoy them. Thoreau starts off with something pretty uncontroversial. He says, "As for clothing, to come at once to the practical part of the question, perhaps we are led oftener by the love of novelty and a regard for the opinions of men in procuring it than by a true utility." No kidding. But his quotes get more interesting as he continues on. He says, "Kings and queens who wear a suit but once, though made by some tailor or dressmaker to their majesties, cannot know the comfort of wearing a suit that fits, because they haven't broken it in at all. And so though they're paying lots of money and are very esteemed maybe for having such fancy clothes that are always different, they're probably kind of uncomfortable in them." He continues to say that these kings and queens are no better than wooden horses to hang the clean clothes on. Every day our garments become more assimilated to ourselves, receiving the impress of the wearer's character, until we hesitate to lay them aside without such delay and medical appliances, and some such solemnity even as our bodies. And that's definitely true for me. As someone who cycles through the same clothes all the time, when I introduce a new article of clothing, sometimes I'm not even comfortable wearing it until I've kind of bonded with it over some good project, like splitting wood or doing some electrical work in it or something. But beyond the mere comfort and convenience of having regular clothes, he talks about how people have their priorities askew. He says, "No man ever stood the lower in my estimation for having a patch in his clothes. Yet I am sure that there is greater anxiety commonly to have fashionable, or at least clean and unpatched clothes, than to have a sound conscience." So I want to quickly add something here from the bloomless future. Thoreau's been talking about how people care more about their clothing than their consciences, and Chesterton actually says something similar in his essay titled "On Lying in Bed." He says, "If there is one thing worse than the modern weakening of major morals, it is the modern strengthening of minor morals. Thus it is considered more withering to accuse a man of bad taste than of bad ethics. Cleanliness is not next to godliness nowadays, for cleanliness is made essential, and godliness is regarded as an offense." Anyway, I thought that was fitting to add in here, but back to Thoreau. A little bit later he says that it would be easier for people to hobble to town with a broken leg than with a broken pantaloon. And he says that this is because they consider not what is truly respectable, but what is respected. And I think that's maybe the most important part of all of these quotes, considering what is truly respectable over what is just respected. Because just because people respect something does not mean it ought to be respected. And he makes 2 points to illustrate how much power appearances have over us. He says, imagine if you dressed up a scarecrow. He says, dress a scarecrow in your last shift, and I think shift is a change of clothes. You standing shiftless by, who would not soonest salute the scarecrow? So he thinks that people would suddenly respect the scarecrow because it was dressed up nicely. And what's interesting is that this is the exact point that Odin makes in one of his proverbs in the Poetic Edda. In the Havamal, he has a bunch of proverbs that he lists out, and one of them is pertaining to clothes. He says, "My garments once I gave in the field to 2 landmarks made as men," so essentially 2 scarecrows. So he gave his garments to scarecrows, and he says, "Heroes they seemed once they were clothed. 'Tis the naked who suffer shame." So Odin seems to be on board with judging people by their appearances, or maybe he just thinks it's impractical to be naked in Scandinavia. But it's interesting that both Thoreau and Odin are talking about dressing scarecrows up and the effect that that has psychologically on the viewer. Now here's Thoreau's second point when he's talking about how much sway appearances have over us. He says, "It is an interesting question how far men would retain their relative rank if they were divested of their clothes." Yeah, that would definitely make a more even playing field, I think. As he continues, he starts talking about a travel writer named Madame Pfeiffer who was circling the world, and as she was coming back to her home territories, or at least getting towards them, she wanted to dress nicer. He says, "She felt the necessity of wearing other than a travel dress when she went to meet the authorities, for she, quote, was now in a civilized country where people are judged by their clothes." A civilized country where people are judged by their clothes. Because what's more civilized than judging somebody by their appearance and maybe their financial status? And this is a point that I always find myself making when I'm leaving an interview, saying can finally take off those silly uncivilized clothes and put on something civilized again. And a little while later, he has another one of his strongest quotes in this matter. He says, "But if my jacket and trousers, my hat and shoes are fit to worship God in, they will do, will they not?" Whew. Try to argue with that one. If I can worship God in these clothes, why do you think I need to dress up more for you? Oh dear. He then talks about how he went to a tailor once and tried to get clothes from them, and the tailor was confused because those clothes weren't in fashion anymore. He says, "When I ask for a garment of a particular form, my tailoress tells me gravely, 'They do not make them so now,' not emphasizing the 'they' at all, as if she quoted an authority as impersonal as the fates. And I find it difficult to get made what I want, simply because she cannot believe that I mean what I say, that I am so rash. When I hear this oracular sentence, I am for a moment absorbed in thought, emphasizing to myself each word separately, that I may come at the meaning of it, that I may find out by what degree of consanguinity they are related to me, and what authority they may have in an affair which affects me so nearly. And finally, I'm inclined to answer her with equal mystery, and without any more emphasis of the they. It is true, they did not make them so recently, but they do now." And then he gets to the point of fashion more properly. He says, "The head monkey at Paris puts on a traveler's cap, and all the monkeys in America do the same." And later on, "Every generation laughs at the old fashions, but follows religiously the new." Yeah, I feel like he was maybe even ahead of his time. And then getting more at the capitalistic motives of fast fashion, he says, "I cannot believe that our factory system is the best mode by which men may get clothing. As far as I have heard or observed, the principal object is not that mankind may be well and honestly clad, but unquestionably that the corporations may be enriched." Yeah. Then he concludes the paragraph by saying, "In the long run, men hit only what they aim at. Therefore, though they should fail immediately, they had better aim at something high." Something higher than just judging people by their appearances, I should hope. People sometimes point out to me that it is a sign of respect to dress up fancily for somebody who is of a higher station than you in society. But I also have a hard time shaking the fact that it almost seems like an insult to that person to assume that they would be judging you by your appearances. Like if they were actually respectable, they wouldn't be doing that, right? So by dressing up for them, you're kind of insulting them, saying they're not respectable. Is how I sometimes think about it. But I still play the game sometimes, and it's fun to dress up sometimes, so I'm not taking this too seriously, but it's a conviction that is kind of hard to shake. To end this video, I thought I would set down Walden and pick up Thoreau's journals, which, if you didn't know, is where Walden came from. It's like a distillation of his journals. This, by the way, is only half of Thoreau's journals, and each page is 4 pages. It's one of my most prized possessions, and I have the other half as well. But I wanted to talk about a section here that this topic reminded me of. Here Thoreau's talking about encountering one of his neighbors on the road one day, and the neighbor is 80 years old and bent over with age, and he's carrying his shoes, walking barefooted in October in Massachusetts. And he did this because his shoes had apples he had been picking in them, and he didn't have something else to carry them in. So he innocently took off his shoes and filled them up with little apples, and also was carrying a dead robin for fun as well, to eat, of course. But of this man, Thoreau says that if he had been a young man, he would have probably thrown away his apples and put on his shoes when he saw me coming, for shame. But old age is manlier, and has learned to live makes fewer apologies. And I think that's a good thing to do. Make fewer apologies and don't let people's pettiness cramp your style. Anyway, see ya. People say to dress for success, and I say that I do. This is a very versatile outfit. I can do a lot more in this than I could do in a suit. I wear it in the lab every day and can immediately go crawl underneath the house to help someone with their plumbing or go cut out some floor joists out of a living room. And I'd like to see a suit that could do that.